Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Knightsbridge is the name, and I've been asked often by people this question: is the media honest, or is there a hidden agenda? Probably because I'm a news junkie and poli-sci was my major at UCLA, so people always seem to come to me for political questions. All right, let's get straight into it. So, media in democracies, obviously very important, and the founding fathers of the United States were well aware of that. And the first amendment to the US Constitution is freedom of press, freedom of speech, namely, and then of course by association, freedom of press. So they knew how important it was for citizenry, for the population to be informed when they're making decisions, obviously for voting and things like that. So yeah, if you don't have an educated populace, it's very hard to really have a democracy. All right. On the other side of the spectrum, of course, are totalitarian regimes. North Korea comes to mind, various other countries. They obviously have a very firm grip on the media. So typically in such countries, Turkey's beginning to look more like an authoritarian regime. Erdogan is a bit of a strong man, and what he doesn't like, he pretty much shuts down. So there's a bit of a war going on between the government and journalists and journalism. So so if basically in such countries, what the leader wants, the leader gets, and if you're on the kind of on the wrong side of the law, or on the wrong side of his taste, so to speak, you're going to be find yourself in some hot water, unfortunately. All right, so another reason why journalists, or of course the media, is important, and they try to keep it honest, is integrity. Now, if you study journalism, amongst the first things that they drill into your head is that your name is vital, very important. If you don't have your name, if you're branded someone that, fabricates evidence, doesn't cite their work correctly, things like that, then it's highly likely that that reputation is going to stick with you for a long time, because really your name is all you have. And if you don't have that in journalism, no one's going to hire you, no one's going to take you seriously, and big publications or TV stations, whatnot, might not be interested in you because of the tainted name that you have. All right, of course, that's your professional integrity. We also have organizational credibility, which is basically always Fox News comes to mind. Of course, I wouldn't say that they're the most unbiased news station, but they like to say that they're fair and balanced, and that's their premise, that's their slogan, and that's what they believe. So it's even for Fox, that most people believe really is a mouthpiece for the GOP, the Republican Party. Even they want to portray the fact that they're unbiased and fair, and that they have credibility. So what they tell you, you should believe. Now, on the other side of the coin, we have other reasons that, other side of the coin are the reasons why probably shows you that unfortunately news media might not be so concerned about telling the truth, and they might have other kind of ulterior motives or a hidden agenda, so to speak. So I have to give you guys some background for that. Now, in the 90s, if any of you are old enough to remember, I am, we had a big explosion of cable TV. So before that, terrestrial TV, just regular TV that you pick up on with antennas, before digital, before all that, you had a choice of, depending on the country. In the UK, you had 5 stations. In the US, you had, I don't know, anywhere between 5 and 10, 12 stations that you got. So everyone was pretty much watching the same stations. Now, what happened in the 90s with the proliferation of cable TV and satellite media, TV, was that suddenly we got a lot more choice. And of course, with that choice, we got lots of stations basically of news that were reporting news probably for a smaller segment of so their viewership was smaller. Let's say, you know, CNN was for more liberal people, and Fox became for more conservative people, and so on, etc. Of course, today you can watch news on YouTube or anywhere else, so it's even got more tailored. Yes, so unfortunately, what happens when it's very tailored is that confirmation bias kind of might creep in. Because before the 90s, everyone was watching the same news. It was kind of, let's say, pretty fair. To left wing, to right wing, it reported on all issues, etc. Now, what's happened now, because of the fact that their viewership is much smaller and they cater for a much narrower spectrum of the population, news stations might be reporting something a little more skewed. So everything, if it's a conservative station, they're going to kind of, with the words and what they show, they're gonna show a kind of a more rosy outlook upon, let's say, a conservative politician, and maybe not report something that's kind of negative, reflected on that local politician that may be a conservative. I don't know, sex scandal, something like that, as that's an example. And of course, confirmation bias. I can use my laser pointer. Confirmation bias is where people essentially are looking for things that they already believe. So if a conservative person is watching, let's say, Fox, and a very conservative presenters, particularly on Fox, they watch them because they already believe pretty much what that person has said, and their ideas have synergy with them. So what they hear that confirms their beliefs, and vice versa. So it's a kind of a two-way street. They're only watching because they believe the things that they know are going to be coming up. So if you're a Trump fan and you love him and he can do no wrong, and he's one of Jesus's disciples, then pretty much Fox is going to tell you so. So that just reconfirms your pre-existing belief, and that's essentially what confirmation bias is. All right, so. Other issue we have when it comes to reporting the truth is corporations and interests. And first thing is advertising. Now, you may ask how that plays into it. Well, I'm glad you asked. So advertising is the biggest source of revenue for private TV stations. Of course, not for public ones, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Private stations, this is their their bread and butter, and they need to be concerned about getting in the big ads, the big companies, Sony, Apple, whatever you may think of, and that's kind of where the attention needs to go to, and not so much about journalistic integrity or covering all the news. It's really advertising rates are the most important, and viewership numbers that we'll get into later. But essentially, that's about ratings, which I'll talk about soon. Now, of course, when corporations are involved, there are conflicts of interest. If a big corporate giant like Disney or Fox, because Fox has many entities and tentacles, so if they buy out a local station, local affiliate, as they've done through like a lot of course, U.S. municipalities, then of course they're less likely. The station is less likely to paint their parent company in a bad light. And not just that, the interests of the parent company. So let's say Fox was accused of Fox Australia, let's say, or Fox that I believe owns Sky TV in the UK. So let's say the acquisition of Sky was kind of shady, and there was there was some corruption involved or whatnot. Well, Fox stations in the US, because the parent company is essentially the same, might be a little bit worried and wary about reporting on that. And if they do, because the story gets big enough, then they report it in not really a very critical way and not very objectively, because they're a little bit too close to the subject, so to speak. So that's conflict of interest. Now, as I alluded to before, advertising and ratings. So as I mentioned, ratings are what really drives advertising rates, and basically there are companies that monitor, I'm not sure how many, but there are a company or two that monitor how many people watch each particular show and station, and those numbers are essentially ratings. And the ratings, so the number of viewers is how they determine how much advertisers pay. So the more viewers, the more advertising rates go up, the more money a station makes. And because these are, of course, corporate entities, they're worried about the bottom line, and they're worried about essentially, dividends they have to pay to shareholders. They're publicly traded companies, most of them, if not all of them. So it's kind of a difficult balancing game for them. All right, so this is the essentially the problem between public and private entities. Public stations don't have to worry about ratings. Their money comes typically from license fees or taxpayers, essentially from the government. So they don't have to worry so much about that. So they can remain more objective. But private companies have to kind of toe the party line or toe the corporate line, and watch out that it doesn't damage their parent company or their interests, or wide-ranging effects, actually. So next thing, don't offend the viewership. So as I kind of alluded to before, if you want to be a station with really high ratings and high advertising, you have to know your market segment, and you have to basically not upset them. Because obviously, as I mentioned before, we're talking about confirmation bias. So if you say things that your viewers are not going to like, then they're not going to watch, which means your ratings drop, and then your advertising revenue also drops. Not good. So so what's unfortunately what that has led to is sensational, yet not so informative news. So what does that mean? Basically, it means we know more about Paris Hilton's underwear and her parking tickets than we do know about, what's going on in South Sudan or the Syrian conflict or anything important like that. 300,000 people die in Syria. I don't know the details, but I know what President Trump tweeted this morning about his coffee. I don't know. I'm just being facetious, but unfortunately that's become the case. It's all sensational news because it grabs headlines and attention, and unfortunately, 10,000 people in Damascus dying really doesn't. Sad to say. Okay, another problem. Journalism is getting too close to power. Journalists, rather, or you could say journalism, getting a little too close to power. What I mean by that is that it's a very delicate balance between being close enough to government so you can get the scoop and the interviews, yet not too close that you're reluctant to tell kind of the truth, and reluctant to ask the hard questions that really get to the bottom of things and get to the truth, because you're worried that you're not going to be invited to press events, your press credentials might be jacked, withdrawn. So yeah, especially with this current administration in the White House, who seem to be particularly childish and have disregard and a distaste for really, I would say democratic values in journalism. So one good thing about this current administration is that the news media was a little, I feel, too cozy and close to the Obama administration. And now they're starting to take their job a little more seriously because they've been put on the offensive. Because Mr. Trump calls every kind of news outlet that he doesn't agree with or any hard question that he doesn't want to answer fake news. So that's actually, I mean, it's kind of it's sad to say, but we maybe we needed a little bit of a contentious president to kind of wake up the news media. So that's a good thing in my eyes. And I don't mean just if this administration. I mean of every administration. I thought the media, especially the large, the kind of the mainstream media, was way too close to the Trump administration. He was the darling, Mr. Obama was the darling of journalists, and so it got a little bit too cozy, I feel, and objectivity was lost. All right, so what do we do now? We move on to how to fix it. Sadly, not so easy, but I have a few ideas, which may or may not work, but anyway. So the first one is license fee-based TV. Some of you may know, I grew up in the UK, and of course, a big part of growing up in the UK is the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, oldest station in the world, oldest television station in the world, and they're still, I believe, the biggest news network in the world, report in 43 languages all over, and they're pretty trusted throughout the world, and they're banned from quite a few countries because the regimes don't really like what the BBC has to say. Okay, so what the BBC does now is, they've done since day one, is they have a license fee. So about the conversion goes about $200 a year. You pay per household for radio and TV. Of course, that includes the news. What does that mean? Well, it means there's no advertisers. And if there's no advertisers, as we talked about earlier, they don't have to worry about essentially the interests of the advertisers or upsetting them, and they don't have to worry about parent companies being upset or conflicts of interest, anything like that. Much, much easier to report what they want. Of course, there are no shareholders, and they are not for profit. So any money they do make, any surplus, goes straight back into the company. I do believe they do they have some advertising on online if your IP address is not from the UK. So they are allowed to advertise abroad, but strictly prohibited. Except for, of course, their own programs and channels. It's strictly prohibited in the UK, commercial advertising. So, all right, so next thing is monopolies. Now, what they are is when a company, controls the market pretty much and has an unfair advantage. Now, who's supposed to stop that from happening? It is the FTC and the DOJ, the Federal Trade Commission of the US and the US Department of Justice. Now, they are supposed to stop any mergers or acquisitions. Basically, if they believe that the market is starting to be controlled by one company, they're supposed to kind of get in the way of that, block the merger, and if it's not conducive to the public good, then they definitely have an obligation to stop it. Unfortunately, I feel that they really haven't been doing their job so well, because something like 5 companies own 80% of the media outlets in the United States today. Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on those numbers, but it's a huge proportion. All right, so what can we do? What else can we do to help fix the problem of news that's not really that interested in getting to the truth? Another thing is multiple sources. Now, a little anecdote from my younger days. Teacher of mine in high school, very interested in politics, would always say, if you want to know the news, if you want to know the truth, you should read something from the left, read something from the right, and the truth lays somewhere in between. Now, of course, that's mostly a political for political news, but still, what he meant was just get your news from multiple sources, because secondhand information is always going to be biased, no matter what you do. So there's nothing you can do about it. Best thing is to read up from multiple sources. If you're a Fox News watcher, gasp. Maybe you should try reading, or watching at least CNN or something a little bit considered more left-wing. Arguably, we don't really have a left wing in the US if you compare it to the European spectrum. But either way, more sources, the better, the more reliable, and the more likely for you to understand, really get a big picture of what's going on. So whatever you do, there's bias, and you can't do anything about that. Now, that nicely segues into the next little bit, which is fact-checking. So we really have information at our fingertips in today. I mean, everything is online. Of course, there's a lot of junk media online. There's a lot of ridiculous stories, sensationalized stories. But either way, if you want to get to the truth, if you want to get to the bottom of something, good sources are on there too. So you have to do your homework. One problem with how news easily confuses people or manipulates people is when they report statistics. And if you don't really know what to look for when they give you stats, context, for example, then it's really hard to get a big picture, and easily people are misled. So if they give me a report, if they tell me a survey of cancer rates across a few states. Now, if they don't have a large enough sample size, a large enough population size, then really the study is worthless, and a lot of people might not know to look out for that. So yeah, that's important to remember. And of course, yeah, everything is online, as is my station, my channel. So that's about it. That's all from me. If you like it, please subscribe. Thank you for watching. Subscribe. Let me know what you think. Comment, so I know you guys are interested and I should do more of these in the future. Thank you very much. Take care.